Great. Hello, everybody. We are so excited to be here. As you know, our film Intervention is all about the intersection of family and race and mental health. And so it seemed only right to have a conversation with the amazing Emma Larson about some of the things that our film is about, specifically family therapy. So Emma is a therapist and social worker based in Brooklyn. She provides therapy to individuals and families with a particular focus on adolescents and emerging adults. And fun fact, she is currently taking patients. So jump on that if you've been looking for a therapist. Emma is just the most fantastic person I can imagine for a possible therapist. So truly get on it.
That's right.
Emma, we're so happy you're here. So just to kick it off, because we're collecting questions from our community of friends and people who have been following Intervention. But first, before we get to some of those specific questions, can you tell us a little bit about like how you first became interested and involved in therapy?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I initially, like when I first graduated college, I wanted to work in publishing. In publishing, I thought this was what I wanted to be doing, and I was really unhappy. And I remember like sitting on my lunch break one day and just being like, if I won the lottery and I didn't have work, what would I do? And like my answer to myself was I would be a therapist.
Nice.
I can go to grad school for that. But it was really like I kind of like surprised myself, and I was like, oh, I can just like go be a social worker and like become a therapist.
Awesome.
Okay. And then when I reflect on it more, I'm like, you know, I had this really great therapist when I was a teenager who really kind of changed my life. And I think it is not a coincidence that I ended up sort of specializing in working with teens. There is, for me, something about kind of like giving to others what was given to me. But it also felt like a career that kind of played to my strengths because I really I love listening to people and hearing their stories. And so, yeah, that's kind of how it happened. But I like, it was a thing that when I realized I wanted to do it, sort of surprised me.
Awesome. And so you mentioned that it was because of your experiences in therapy, kind of when you were a teenager, that made you want to work in that age range. And you do what could I ask? What's the difference between kind of like individual therapy and like family therapy, or like individual therapy and like or like when you're talking to a teen and you're introducing their family is certainly a part of their dynamics. Yeah, talk about the difference between individual and family therapy, if you could.
That is such a good question. I think the most important difference is that when I'm doing individual therapy, even if I'm meeting with a person's family members, my client is that individual. When I'm doing family therapy, my client is the family. When I'm doing therapy, my client is the couple. And that's kind of a different way of operating and relating. When I work with teenagers, I do often collaborate with parents, but I am their child's therapist.
I see.
Whereas when I'm meeting with a family, it's not even like there are 5 individuals who are my client. It's like I'm here serving like the family as a system. But I started pursuing family therapy training because I wanted to be more skilled at working with the families of the young people I was working with. And then as I was like, oh wait, actually family therapy is like its own whole thing. And like a family as a system is a fascinating unit to work with. And then I started getting really interested in that. But I really like having a balance of both.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, when I think about therapy, when I think about other people's therapy, I think it's like to solve them. Do you know what I mean? To like make them less difficult, to like deal with their shit so I don't have to deal with that shit. When I think of therapy about myself, it's like it's an existential process of just like trying to understand your own life, and you may still be an asshole after therapy, but you have a sense of self in a different way. But like, so like I don't know, do you feel like those two things come in tension when you're doing sessions with families? Like, what does it mean for the health of the family to be good versus the health of the individual?
Yeah, that's a really good question also. I think that, so I guess it really depends on what the goal is that the family tells me they want to work on,
Mm-hmm.
and what the goal is that the individual tells me they want to work on.
Mm-hmm.
Different ways want different things, although very frequently what most people want is to be able to communicate better,
Mm-hmm.
and like for everyone to like get their needs met more smoothly.
Mm-hmm.
But it's true that like if I'm approaching a situation and the individual is my client, I will probably think that like the intervention and the solution is going to be a different thing.
Mm-hmm.
When we talk about family therapy, at least from a like family systems perspective, there's this idea that when you change one part of the system, the whole system changes. And when you change, all the parts change.
Mm-hmm.
And like a family will come in and it seems like the problem is in one place. It's this one person in the family is acting this way.
Mm-hmm.
And that person is usually kind of like some language that we use around it is like the symptom bearer. Like this
Mm-hmm.
person expressing symptoms that are actually the symptoms of the whole system's problem.
Oh wow. Okay, I like that. The symptom bearer. That's definitely
That's
the way to-
very, yeah, very cool.
Yeah. And so it's not, we're not changing things for that one person, and we're not changing that one person. We're changing how everyone interacts. We're changing how everyone operates, and that will both change this one person and also everyone.
Interesting.
It's
That's
true.
so interesting.
That's fascinating. Can I ask another question? Because you mentioned like it depends what the goal of the family is. How do you, who speaks to the goal for the family? Is that sort of like, is there like a moment of collective agreement? Is that like, is there one person who usually like is sort of the, I guess the first words that come to mind are like matriarch or patriarch, or like the head of the family, the capo, I don't know, like whoever's in charge. Like,
I just realized my phone's about to die. I'm going to plug this in. Hang on.
Okay, plug away. I guess interesting question, Marina, because I think the patriarch or matriarch is usually the one who does not want to go to therapy, and is the one who's like, everyone's gonna blame me. But Emma, you're the experienced one. Yeah, what do you feel about that? How do we decide what is the goal of therapy? Who speaks to that?
It depends on the composition of the family, I think. Like if you have a family that's like mom, dad, 7-year-old, like mom and dad are coming in and telling you what the goal is for the family. If it's 4 adult siblings, that's a situation. So it really depends on like who's in the family, and like how old everyone is, that kind of thing. Although I will say, like, now that I'm hearing that come out of my mouth, I'm like, no, actually the 7-year-old like has goals. I want to hear what the 7-year-old's goals are, but that gets weighted and interpreted a little differently than if it's like everyone's an adult and they all have kind of like, they're all coming on the same plane.
That makes me think of when my parents tell the story of when I was a kid. I wasn't speaking that early. I was taking too long to speak, and they brought me to some speech therapist, and they were like, and the speech therapist, whatever, examined me or whatever. They're like, no, the kid's fine. And they're like, what are you talking about? He never speaks. Everyone's like, yeah, always yelling at my family. And the therapist was like, oh, but do you give him a chance to speak? Or do you just constantly talk? What do you mean talk? We're all professors. You know, and yeah, even the child can, I guess, have that revelation or have that effect.
Absolutely.
One question before we get into more into specific ones, I just, so much of our story is about the health of the family, but also like this kind of underlying fear and underlying dread of like, I just never have to speak to you people again if I make that choice. Does that feel like a healthy choice, or is that an unhealthy choice when you decide to try to like, and at what point is it acceptable to cut off your family or to run away or kind of deny these relationships?
Oh my God, it's really interesting that you asked me that, because like I don't speak to my father.
Oh, wow.
And I
Wow.
that choice that like we will not be doing this anymore.
Mm.
And I think that there were a lot of reasons that was like a healthy choice for me personally. But I would never say blanket across the board. You stop talking to your dad. Even hard, right? So it like I think it's really impossible for me to say on a general basis like when healthy to cut off your family or to cut off a member of your family. But I definitely think that it can be. I think that sometimes it's not.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is
Yeah, no, I definitely feel I especially as I was beginning to do therapy, it was like, maybe I should just fucking move to Alaska. Then these bastards will never find me. Fuck them all.
Right, which is like it totally makes sense and is also super avoidant. And
yeah, avoid it.
so you're saying that you've never recommended that your patients just move to Alaska and never speak to their close relationships ever again? It's not a piece of advice you give.
never been a recommendation that I have made, but I'm not ruling it out.
Yeah, people have to move to Alaska for some reason, you know.
I mean, it might be the best move for somebody.
Oh man, this is so great. Should we jump into some of the questions that people asked for that they wanted to ask you? Because there's some really interesting ones in here. Okay, awesome. So the first question was, how much information do you usually have on a family before they show up to a session, and who provides that information? And then the subtext of that question in parentheses with a question mark exclamation point is, can you trust it?
That's great. So I ideally would have some amount of information from everyone. Meaning, and if someone's like too young to fill out a intake questionnaire, the parent does it for them. But I would want some kind of like demographic information and basic history, like health history. History, have you ever been hospitalized? Do you have a history of, substance abuse? Do you have a history of mental health diagnoses in the past? Have you been to therapy before? Do you have any health problems? So I want, like, I would have that information, and then I would have from each person in the family some written description of why they're seeking. But it's usually only a few sentences. I also, like, in my practice will offer, and I think most therapists do this, like a free 15-minute consultation to like see if we're a good fit. So usually in that I have like a little bit of information from people.
A 15-minute consultation for a family seems very little. I mean, like, it's just like, maybe...
I know. Yes. And you don't gather that much information. I think that is more just to kind of like see, are we vibing?
That to me feels like that feels like adjacent to like what people often express a desire for with like online dating too, where they're like, if only there was a way to just, because you know in a second, right? So it feels like there's that makes a lot of sense to me though, that it would very easily rule out a bad connection to just have that quick call.
Yes, because chemistry is a thing in like all relationships, including like with your therapist, right?
Mhm.
Click with someone and sometimes you don't, and it's like not that intellectual of a thing, it just is a thing that you feel. And so it's nice to, before you like, you know, shell out the money for a session, and to be like, oh, does this have potential to be a relationship that works? So going in, it's like I've got a few sentences about what the like quote unquote presenting problem is, but I want that information from each person so that I have all their perspectives, and then the hope is that we can come to an agreement about what the problem is that we're solving together. But people do often have different ideas. I love this question of like, can you trust it? Because to me, yeah, I trust that what each person tells me is their truth,
Mhm.
but everyone's living a different truth.
Mhm.
And you kind of have to like live in that middle where everyone's truth kind of like comes together or doesn't. But I have to weigh all of those equally. So there's a lot, I think, being a family therapist and being an individual therapist too, there's a lot of like holding multiple truths that you have to do, or like holding multiple contradictory ideas and like being comfortable with that existing and coexisting.
That's fascinating. And I could also see how that in some ways is almost scarier than the idea of like somebody else in my family might lie about this thing that happened. Like the idea that that is absolutely their reality is like scary. That feels very threatening, like to think about.
Yeah, it's
fascinating.
Next question on the list.
Yeah.
Have you ever met a family and just thought, nope? Have you ever just like was like, nope, I'm not, this is not, they're not for me, I'm not for them. I don't want to deal with this.
Um, I have I have I've had mismatches.
Mm-hmm.
I've never immediately had the reaction of like, no way.
Mm-hmm.
But they're definitely like, I'm not good at everything.
Mm-hmm.
No this. And so there are like certain presentations or certain problems that either I'm like, I'm not good at working with this, or where I'm like, oh, this triggers my stuff in a way that I will not be able to help you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that like that's going to be different for everyone, but everyone has there are things that they're not as good with, and there are things that they're great with.
Yeah, I feel like that can be one of the most kind of challenging things about getting into therapy if you're starting it for the first time. That if you don't, I mean, it takes so much effort to like get to the place where you're like, you know what, I will call a therapist. I will get over all my hang-ups and call a therapist. And then if you meet the person and you're like, oh, we don't match at all, like you don't understand me at all, it can be incredibly discouraging to then try to find that next person. But it's such an important part of that first step is finding the right therapist, because of who you are, because of all your issues or whatever it is, you do need to find the person you feel like you will listen to and they will listen to you, you know.
Yeah, you need to feel like someone's gonna get you. Yeah.
Awesome.
Next question.
Yeah, next question. This is kind of a related one. Have you ever wanted to tell one of the family members, run and don't look back?
I wouldn't go that far. Have I ever wanted to tell one of the family members run and don't look back? There have definitely been moments as a therapist where I have thought that a relationship was really not working.
Mm-hmm.
I had a personal reaction of like, these people shouldn't be together.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like a personal reaction that I need to work through.
Mm-hmm.
That's never been where I land.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I can have my own like reactive moments,
Mm-hmm.
where I have a feeling about something that's happening, or the people who are talking, but I'm not that black and white.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit more to that, the personal reaction versus like the therapist reaction, both in terms of how that plays out in a therapy session, but also maybe like in your own personal life, like when a friend comes to you with like some, something, some story or something, how do you balance the sort of relationship hat and the friend hat, the therapist hat and the friend hat that you sort of wear in your sessions and in real life?
I love this question. I was just talking to my partner about this actually. Like my therapist self is like a really distinct part of me. And I kind of feel like when I am being a therapist, I like click into this different mode and this different way of like hearing and seeing. So have I felt about my friends run and don't look back? Yes. Indicated this to said friends? Probably. I will have strong opinions about like why my friend needs to leave her boyfriend. And I am not taking in information in the same way when I am the therapist to a couple or even to an individual. I'm like trying to find the language for what's different, but I think I'm making a lot more room for gray areas, and I'm trying to create a lot of space between my personal reaction and kind of like my clinical assessment. And so then what I'll say about personal reaction is like, I mean, your therapist is a human being, going to have internal experiences like a human being sometimes.
Yeah.
And occasionally they might not do a great job of like managing that themselves, and it might come out, right? And then you might need to talk about it. But if I'm doing family therapy with a family and I notice that the dad in this family reminds me of my dad, and it makes me feel like I don't like him, that guy's not my dad.
Yeah. Well,
The dad in. And so then I need to spend time noticing, what am I projecting onto him? What am I assuming? At what point am I like getting pulled back into the past in my own head? And that can cloud my understanding of what's actually happening for everyone in the family. And that's why we have supervisors, so that I can, after that session, be like, okay, this was the emotional reaction that I was having as a person. Like, can you help me think through what that means for me and what that means for them? And that's often useful information too. Like, you can do all sorts of things with that information about what your personal reaction is. But we would call that countertransference, which is like the feeling the therapist has about the patient or towards the patient, or that are triggered by the patient. But like, it's my responsibility to tease that apart.
Yeah.
Did that answer?
No, that makes a lot of sense.
Totally.
Another way to think about it, or another, from not from the therapist, from the patient perspective, sometimes people are like, I don't need to go to therapy because I've got a good friend I can talk to all the time. But your friend is not your therapist, and they're tied up so much in your emotions, and like they'll be exhausted by you, and it would damage the relationship. Versus the relationship with a therapist is somebody who does not have those kind of investments in you, and doesn't have to be concerned necessarily about how they make you feel, but like to deal with the problem. So yeah, that makes it seems like an important thing to separate, but also a difficult thing.
Yeah. One way I would frame it too is that, like, so my therapy clients, like, I care deeply about them, and I'm invested in their well-being emotionally, but I don't actually need anything from them. It's not reciprocal in that way. Like, they don't need feel any kind of way. My, like, they don't need to take care of my feelings. They don't even, like, I don't need them to be or do anything except like show up for therapy and pay for it. But like in terms of the like emotional relationship, like I don't need anything from them. I need things from my friends. I need my friends to love me as much as I love them. I need my friends to listen to me, and I need to listen to them. It needs to be kind of like a give and take, and that's really
yeah.
That's such a fascinating, yeah, that's really fascinating. That's very, yeah, very cool to think about. Wow. Yeah. Should we go on to the next
Should we
question?
do this one? Yeah. I feel
Great.
like we kind of hit a couple with that were similar. Do you mind if I go to this one?
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
In a family therapy session, do you think sorry, I got tongue tied and mushed to mouth. In a family therapy session, do you think about the roles of adult children in the family more like an adult, or do they stay within the role of children in some sense?
okay. So a family as like a unit has a life cycle just as like an individual does, right? And so the tasks of a family with young children are really different from the developmental tasks of a family where the children are adults. And so the role of child and parent, but the role of adult child is really different from the role of child, and the needs of adult child are really different. So I think the answer is like both and neither. Because yeah, a 12-year-old needs something really different from their parents than a 34-year-old. And also a parent can have different expectations and get different needs met.
Yeah.
By a 12-year-old than a 34-year-old.
Yeah. But do you find most 34-year-olds, or maybe I'm speaking for myself, are like, but this thing happened when I was 8 and I am this person from that moment forever, even if I'm an adult?
I mean, to a certain extent, yes. And I think we've all had the experience, myself very much included, of like, you go back to your family of origin and suddenly like regressed 15 years. That just happens, right? And we're going to bring that each other. But the other thing I'll say is a 34-year-old who's having like the 12-year-old part of them triggered is from an actual 12-year-old. So you're also going to approach that differently. Like a 34-year-old who's like, when I was 12, you did this and I'm still not over it, is different from a 12 currently going through it.
True. Yeah, fair.
And the like 68-year-old parent is also like different and in a different life stage now. And so that's a different role too. And a different way of dealing with it.
What percentage of like family issues would you say come from like a family crisscrossing those things, like treating children as though they are adults, treating adult children as though they're children, like adult kids feel like acting or behave, like crossing the wires on what it means to be an adult child versus a child, or a parent to adults versus a parent to children?
Oh my God, I have no idea. I have no idea what percentage would be, but I do think that is something that's really challenging in families, is like the roles, what the realistic expectations are. It's hard to navigate. And yes, that happens. Both of those things happen a lot. Treating children like adults and treating adults like children are things that happen a lot in families.
Just another question from our listeners, from our viewers. How do you handle when people come in applying therapy or therapy adjacent concepts a little too broadly, or with a misunderstanding of a concept? One example is like, we've called, ever since Trump got into office, we're calling everyone a narcissist because it's like so familiar. Like the idea of setting boundaries can just be an asshole sometimes, or attachment style. I feel like I use the word codependency kind of liberally and not to the definition of codependency. But yeah, how do you handle those like pop culture therapy ideas that are in the world?
Another one I hear a lot, I think this is like mostly a Gen Z thing, is people being like, I'm bipolar. And I'm like,
no, that's a specific chemical thing.
yeah, like, do you like your moods change? Like that's a really confusing one for me, and it happens a lot. And what I do in that case, and what I do in all of these cases, because this is a very real phenomenon, is like, what I need to know is what that language means to you. And that's actually like when people come in using therapy speak inaccurately or loosely, or misusing terms, but also just in general. Like my task is to understand what the experience of being you feels like and what the meaning of this is for you. And so if someone is talking about codependency, I need to understand what it is they're saying when they say that word. It might be that they are using it accurately. It might be that they're using it loosely. It might not actually matter. What I need to get at is like, what are you experiencing right now?
Yeah.
Like, good answer, good answer.
Yeah.
Snap. Yeah, good answer.
One question, just to go back to this one, somebody asked, and if a family has ever made you cry on the spot or with them or privately.
Yes, not on the spot with them. I am thankful that I have never cried in a session. But like but for the grace of God go I. Like I'm not it out. I have definitely cried after sessions. Absolutely.
And when that happens, like, is that because of like what it's like, what is being activated in you? Is it like, does that usually come from something that like triggers you in your own experience? Is it something like empathic on behalf of the family? I'm curious what that is.
It's been both. I have worked with people who have triggered my stuff in such a way that after that session is over, I'm crying about my stuff. But I've also had the experience of working with people who are suffering so deeply that it just makes me fucking sad. And then I'm crying for them. Both of those have been my experience.
Yeah. Another question, and this is one that you've touched on a little bit already so far, but do you ever feel more connected with one family member and want to take sides?
Yes. And that's why we have supervisors.
Yeah.
Yes, and good. Yes, and good. Yes, and
you have to watch it both ways, right? Like if you're having a really strong negative reaction to someone in the family, you need to pay attention to that and investigate that and work on that. If you're having a really strong positive reaction to one person in the family, you also need to pay attention to that and investigate that. And I've had
no, go for it. Sorry,
I've had like really strong negative reactions to people and been like, wow, I need to look at what that is. But I've also been like, oh, I really like this person. And then I'm like, okay, Emma, like what's happening for you in this moment?
Yeah, I feel like as a person who goes to therapy, I always want the therapist to like me the best and like go like, wow, your problems are the most profound and the way you talk about them, so interesting.
Same. That's how I feel about my therapist.
All right. Next.
Yeah,
the next one. I'll read this one. It's a little bit longer one. I've always wondered whether therapists are supposed to work only with the information patients share with them during sessions, or whether it's considered all right to look up a person online and find out things that way. Could you speak a little bit to that, like information that you get from them versus like outside information?
This is like juicy and controversial. I like people differ on this one. I fall in the camp of I only want to know what you tell me.
Mhm.
But some people would Google a patient. I don't. But
As
I
someone,
also
as someone who goes there, but I'm always like, can you just call my previous therapist? I worked on this with them for a while. Let them tell you how crazy I am or not crazy. But it seems like therapists don't talk to each other like that.
they're actually legally prohibited.
Oh wow, crazy.
Yeah, you would sign paperwork for your therapist to be able to talk to your last therapist.
I tell them it's okay all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like people also differ in working with couples whether they'll like keep secrets or not. Like
Mhm.
some therapists are like, if you tell me something individually, if you're a couples therapist, like if you tell me something individually, I'm not gonna, that's a secret you're keeping from your partner, like I'm not gonna keep that secret for you.
Mhm.
And some people will, and it's like
Mm.
people just don't agree about it.
Mm.
But I don't feel comfortable knowing something about someone that they didn't tell me. And I actually feel that way in my personal life too. Like I don't like to Google people
Oh
I
wow,
know.
not a big gossip.
Oh no, I'm a gossip, but only if it like comes to me
Oh, I see.
organically.
I see.
Well,
I see. No
so
snooping. No internet snooping.
so
I will
another
not.
another question, because I suspect that this is probably part of like what's behind that question is like, how can a therapist know that what they're hearing is true, you know, like either an individual and a family and a couple, like how do you like what and you hinted at this a little bit earlier on talking about how there's multiple truths, but yeah, how do you know that what how do you have confidence in like the information that you're being given, or like how do you how do you think about that? I think that's a probably kind of behind this question.
Yeah, I think about it a few ways. I think like one thing that I mean, this sounds evasive, but I really genuinely mean it. Like, what does true mean?
Mm.
What like and and what is like a useful definition of truth also? Like I do think that two people can experience the same event completely differently, and each of their experiences is authentic and genuine. And so that's one answer. The other thing is like people do lie, you know,
Yeah.
and people lie to their therapists. And sometimes you can tell a person is lying, and and so you can't always trust that what someone is telling you is true. In fact, you can expect people to lie to you. And there's not really anything you can do about that.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that? That like in terms of so knowing that there's that's a possibility, that's a likelihood, even that like there are some things that aren't true. Like what like why like does that matter? And if it doesn't matter, like why doesn't it matter? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, and that depends too, right? Like if you're working with a couple and the problem is that one person is repeatedly lying to and cheating on the other person, and they're also lying to the therapist about it, like you're not going to get to work through the problem if the truth isn't coming out, right? That's like logistically like going to be an issue. But I guess the way I think about it is like my clients will tell me what they're ready to tell me when they're ready to tell me, and it's not up to me when that is. It's up to me to gain their trust and to show them that I can like receive their information. But it's just not up to me when people tell me what they tell me. And I think there's a lot of you really have to like trust and respect other people's self-determination as a therapist, I think. Like, because I really as a therapist, I really have to give up on believing that I know what's best or know what's right. Like that's not really my job. And that is a way that like a therapist is different from a friend, because it actually like, I don't know. I don't approach my friendships the same way. I like, sometimes I do think I know what's best. Sometimes I know exactly what my sister should do, and I might tell her that.
Right.
That's not my job with therapy clients. So it matters in certain cases, especially if like the issue that you're working on is betrayal or deception or lying. And also, I have to trust people to tell me when they're ready to tell me.
The flip side of that, which I'm also curious about, is I imagine there must be moments where you have observations that maybe of your client isn't ready for. How do you
Yes.
decide like what to hold back? Or yeah, but how do you decide that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that is something that therapists are navigating frequently, is like, is this the time to share this information? Is this the share this observation? Is this person ready to hear this? And I don't have a really straightforward answer about when you know. And the other thing is sometimes you're wrong. And then you know. If you share an insight that a person is not ready to hear, you know when it's not landing. Or if you share something that's not that's inaccurate, right? Like, because sometimes we're wrong. Like sometimes I'm like, I wonder if this is what's happening, and the person I'm talking to is like, no. I'm like, oh, that didn't work. Testing it out.
How do you get a family that doesn't believe in therapy to believe in therapy? Or like, how do you get, if a family comes in, some people are into it and some people aren't, how do you get people to believe in therapy? Or they just drop out? You don't.
I can't make someone believe in something. I can, and I think that trying to force someone is the worst thing you can do. You know, like I've also definitely like, I've had this experience more often, like when I'm working with teenagers and then I'm trying to collaborate with their parents, like their parents are like not sure about me.
Yeah.
And I have to let that be true. And over time, hope that they learn to see that I am actually trustworthy. But I can't, like, I'm not going to be successful with someone who doesn't want to be there or doesn't trust me.
Yeah. We have two more questions, I think. So the next one is, the question is, when do children stop being accountable for their parents' dreams?
Oh my God. That is so intense.
It's a big question. Yeah.
Good question.
I don't know. Someone tell me. No, I like that. I don't think that's actually a thing that I can even answer as a therapist. Like my personal, like I'm like my just like personal self is having a reaction, which is like children are never accountable to their parents' dreams. But that also that is completely about me and not my professional opinion at all. I don't have a professional answer to that.
Totally fair. Really interesting.
Stump
and then,
the therapist questioner.
Yeah.
Stump the question.
I would say there is not actually an answer to that because it really depends on your and your family's values.
Wow. Yeah. And then the last question, should we bring it home the grand finale?
Let's do it.
How do you define a successful family therapy session?
Ooh, I love that question. How do I define a successful family therapy session? I'm also then thinking about the corollary, like, is there such thing as an unsuccessful family therapy session?
I bet you there is.
I'm sure it's happened. But even if it like feels like disaster, you usually learn something.
Mhm.
And you gather information that can be useful going forward. And maybe a successful therapy session is one after which the family agrees to come back for another therapy session. Like, do you still have buy-in? Cool. Then it's still happening. I really feel like almost any therapy session is going to be valuable in some respect, whether it's that we're like the relationship is being built between the therapist and the family members, or information is being gathered, or a new understanding is being reached. Like, usually there is something of value happening in the room. Yeah.
Fantastic. Emma, this has been so fascinating and so
A pleasure. Thank you
helpful.
so much for
Everybody,
talking.
if you're watching this, remember that Emma is taking patients now. So if you're interested, definitely check out her website. We'll include links all about. And Emma, thank you so much. Thank you so much for speaking with us today. We'll probably have more questions for you in the future.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm so excited about the film. I can't wait to see it become I was going to say become a reality, but what I really meant was I can't wait to see it on the screen.
On a silver screen.
The silver screen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Thank you again so much, and we'll talk soon.
All right. Bye.